Greetings, kindred spirits. I am Lady Onika, a lady of the shadows, here to guide you through the enchanting realms of the unknown. Join me as we explore dark tales, haunting games, and the beautiful intricacies of the macabre. In this crypt of creativity, expect chilling art, eerie stories, and moments of spine-tingling gaming. However, I play a variety of games, so it isn't all horror-based. Together, we shall summon a community where curiosity reigns and shadows dance. If you dare, subscribe and ring the bell. Let's weave our fates together in this thrilling journey. Welcome to my world where the night is always young. Here, I have my first oil painting. Quite a tedious media, if I do say. And sometimes I like to challenge myself by diving into a new media without much research aside from the basics and materials. I still need to get a varnish, but I'm sure I'll be fine. I mean, I still have 6 more whole months before I can even varnish. For my first oil piece, I wanted to do a spooky, disproportionate, tall ghost lady for Halloween. So, I started this 6.5 months ago. However, I had important stuff get in the way. So, I recently returned to my painting and did the final touch-ups. And now, I must wait again. Sad face. Again, this is another one of my anxiety paintings, so be prepared to be like, what the heck is she doing? Anyways, the more I painted, the more proportionate she got and started looking like La Llorona. So today's scary stories will be about ghost ladies and La Lloronas and stuff. So, without further ado, I will introduce to you Azra. They have the perfect voice for creepy stories and will narrate while you watch some relaxing or nerve-inducing painting. Take it away, Azra.
Hello, my name is Azra. La Llorona, the weeping woman of the river. Growing up in a small town in Mexico, I heard stories about La Llorona almost as often as I heard the church bells ringing. My grandmother would tell them at night, her voice dropping to a whisper, recounting how La Llorona was once a beautiful woman named Maria. In a fit of heartbreak, she drowned her children in the river, only to realize what she had done and weep endlessly for them. "Ay, mis hijos," was what she cried, and that wail was said to echo through the night. One summer evening, my friends and I, fueled by a mix of bravery and disbelief, decided to check out the river where La Llorona supposedly roamed. Armed with flashlights and a sense of invincibility, we headed down to the water's edge. The air was thick and heavy, and the night felt unusually quiet. As we reached the riverbank, I remember feeling a chill creep up my spine. Suddenly, we heard it, a soft sobbing that started faint but quickly grew louder, almost desperate. My heart raced, and I exchanged nervous glances with my friends. "It's just the wind," I told myself, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. Then, as if the darkness had come alive, the sobbing turned into a mournful wail. Panic set in, and I could feel something cold and heavy hanging in the air. Just when I thought I'd imagined it all, I turned around and saw a figure, draped in white, hair flowing around her like shadows. In that moment, all I could think was that the legend was real, and she was looking for her lost children. We bolted, our screams mixing with her cries as we ran back home, the darkness swallowing us whole. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that we stumbled into something we were never meant to encounter. The Lady in White. In my little Midwest town, the story of the Lady in White was a staple of local lore. She was said to haunt an old railway bridge, searching for her lost love who died in a tragic accident. My aunt, who loved history, would share these tales over family dinners, her voice lowering as if sharing a secret. One foggy evening, curiosity got the best of me. I decided to check out the bridge, armed only with my camera and a notebook. As I approached, the air felt thick, almost electric. I could swear I heard a distant train whistle, despite the tracks being long abandoned. I started jotting down notes when I heard something behind me. I turned, expecting a stray animal, but there she was, a woman in a flowing white dress, her face hidden in the mist. My heart raced as she raised a hand, pointing toward the river. "Help me," she whispered, and it sent shivers down my spine. For a moment, I was frozen. I felt her sadness envelop me, a deep longing that made my chest ache. Then, just as quickly as she appeared, the fog thickened, and she vanished. I stumbled back, my breath quickening, my camera shaking in my hands. When I looked at the photos later, one caught my eye, a faint outline of her figure in the mist. I'd seen her, and it felt as real as anything could be. I never went back to that bridge. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear her voice calling, a reminder of that eerie encounter. The Ghostly Bride. In my hometown, the story of the Ghostly Bride was passed around like a campfire tale. They said she was a stunning woman who died tragically on her wedding night in a car accident. On certain nights, people claimed you could see her wandering the old road, searching for her lost love. One Halloween, my friends and I thought it would be fun to check out the old chapel where she got married. It was overgrown and abandoned, and the atmosphere felt heavy with history. We lit some candles and called out to her spirit, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. At first, not much happened for what seemed like 20 minutes, but then, as we stood there, hype dying down, the wind picked up, snuffing out our candles one by one. I felt a chill run through me, and suddenly I heard the faint sound of wedding bells ringing in the distance. My friends and I exchanged terrified looks. And then she appeared. A woman in a tattered wedding gown, her hair disheveled and her expression haunting. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I could feel her sorrow wash over me, and instinctively I took a step back, my heart racing. Before I could even think of what to say, she faded away, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of loss. We ran from the chapel, and even now I can't shake that image of her searching eyes. I often wonder if she ever found her beloved, forever trapped in her own story of heartbreak. The Whispering Shadows. A few years ago, my friend Jenna and I decided to explore an old abandoned house on the outskirts of our town. The locals said it was haunted by the spirit of a woman named Margaret, who had lived there in the early 1900s. Curiosity got the best of us, so one crisp autumn afternoon, we made our way to the decrepit building. As we stepped inside, the air felt thick and stale. Dust motes floated in the sunlight that streamed through cracked windows. We wandered from room to room, marveling at the faded wallpaper and the remnants of a life once lived. Suddenly, I felt a chill crawl down my spine and heard a soft whisper that seemed to wrap around me like a shawl. It sounded eerily like someone was calling my name. Jenna, who had been examining an old photograph on the wall, looked up and her face drained of color. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Before I could respond, I felt an icy breeze sweep through the room, despite the fact that the windows were sealed shut. We decided to investigate the staircase, where Jenna claimed to have seen a figure in white. As we ascended, I noticed a faint smell of lavender, a scent that felt oddly familiar. At the top, I caught a glimpse of a woman in a long white dress standing in the doorway of the master bedroom. My heart raced, and I grabbed Jenna's arm, pulling her closer. "Did you see her?" I asked, breathless. "Let's get out of here," she replied, her eyes wide with fear. We hurried down the stairs, but as we passed the front window, I turned to look back. There, in the glass, I saw the silhouette of the woman, her expression a mixture of sorrow and longing. I felt a wave of empathy wash over me. It was as if she was trapped in time, still yearning for something lost. Once outside, we sprinted back to the car, glancing back only once. I couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret was still there, forever bound to her home. The reflection. I lived in an old apartment building that had a creepy reputation among the locals. One evening, after a long, exhausting day, I decided to take a hot shower to relax. The steam filled the bathroom, creating a cozy atmosphere. As I stepped out, I reached for a towel, but something caught my eye in the mirror. A woman's reflection stared back at me. She had long, dark hair that cascaded over her shoulders and was dressed in a vintage nightgown that looked like it belonged to another era. My heart dropped as I spun around, but the bathroom was empty. I felt a shiver race down my spine. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, perhaps a figment of my imagination due to fatigue. But the next morning, as I prepared for work, I noticed something on the bathroom counter, a small antique locket that hadn't been there before. I picked it up, examining the intricate design. Inside, there were two faded photographs, one of a young woman, the other of a small child. That evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered the woman in the mirror. Was she trying to communicate with me? I started doing some research on the apartment building's history and discovered that a young mother had lived there decades ago. She had tragically lost her child and was rumored to haunt the place, still searching for her lost little one. I felt a deep connection to her story. Every night after that, I would sit in the bathroom, locket in hand, and speak softly to her, hoping to provide some comfort. It became a nightly ritual, and while I never saw her again, I felt her presence with me, guiding me in a way I couldn't quite understand. The lady in the woods. My family owns a cabin deep in the woods, a place where we go to escape the chaos of city life. One chilly evening, while we gathered around the fire, my grandmother began telling us stories about the area. She mentioned a woman named Eliza who used to live in a nearby cottage. According to legend, she would wander the woods searching for her lost child, who had vanished many years ago. Later that night, I decided to take a stroll outside, enchanted by the stars twinkling against the dark sky. As I walked along the path, I felt a sudden chill in the air, as if the forest itself held its breath. Then, through the trees, I saw a figure, a woman dressed in a flowing white gown, her hair drifting in the breeze. She moved with an ethereal grace, gliding just out of reach. My heart raced as I approached, but something inside me urged caution. I felt a wave of profound sadness radiating from her, a sorrow that seemed to seep into the very ground beneath my feet. She turned slightly, and I could see the pain in her eyes, as if she was trapped in an eternal search. "Are you okay?" I whispered, though I knew she couldn't hear me. Suddenly, she began to fade, blending into the shadows of the trees. I felt an overwhelming sense of loss, as if I had witnessed something deeply personal and tragic. The next morning, I asked my grandmother about the story. She told me that Eliza's child had gone missing one stormy night, and the townsfolk believed she roamed the woods searching for him, unable to find peace. From that day forward, I felt a connection to the land and to the spirit of Eliza, as if she had shared her sorrow with me, and I vowed to remember her story. The unexpected guest. It was a rainy evening, and I was home alone, nestled on the couch with a book. The sound of raindrops tapping against the window created a comforting rhythm. Suddenly, I heard a knock at the door. I hesitated. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Yet, something compelled me to answer. When I opened the door, a woman stood there, drenched from head to toe in a soaked white dress. Her face was partially obscured by wet hair, and she looked up at me with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sadness. "I'm looking for my home," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart raced, but I felt an odd sense of calm. I invited her inside, grabbing a towel from the rack, but as I turned to offer it, she was gone, vanished into thin air. I stepped outside, scanning the porch and the rain-soaked yard, but there was no trace of her. Confused, I shut the door and tried to shake off the encounter. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I did some research on the neighborhood and learned that the house across the street had burned down years ago. The owner, a woman who looked remarkably like my late-night visitor, had perished in the fire. That revelation sent shivers down my spine. I felt like she had come to me, perhaps seeking closure or comfort. I've kept a candle in my window ever since, a small light to guide her home, wherever that might be. The Child's Lullaby. Growing up in an old house, I often felt a sense of history wrapped around me. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft lullaby drifting through the halls. It was hauntingly beautiful, and it seemed to come from the nursery at the end of the corridor. I was home alone, but I felt an urge to investigate. As I approached the nursery, the singing grew clearer. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was bathed in moonlight, and the rocking chair was gently swaying, though there was no breeze. The lullaby enveloped me, wrapping me in warmth and comfort. It felt strangely familiar, like a memory from a dream. I stood frozen, trying to comprehend what I was witnessing. It was as if the room was alive, filled with love and longing. I finally turned to leave, my heart pounding. But just before I closed the door, I noticed a small framed picture on the wall of a woman with a child, her face kind and gentle. I realized then that the lullaby was a song my grandmother used to sing to me as a baby. Later, I learned that my great-grandmother had lived in that very house. She had lost a child tragically, and it was said she would often sing to her, hoping to soothe the loss. I felt a deep connection to her spirit, as if she had been watching over me all along. Since that night, I often find myself humming that lullaby, a reminder of the love that transcends time. The rocking chair still sways from time to time, and I can't help but smile, knowing she's there, keeping a watchful eye. The Crying Woman at the Cemetery. In my small town in Ohio, there's an old cemetery known for its eerie atmosphere. I often visited it with friends for a thrill, but one night I decided to take my old 1998 hand-me-down Toyota Land Cruiser and go alone to reflect. The moon was high, casting a ghostly light over the gravestones. As I wandered through the rows, I heard a soft, mournful cry coming from deeper within the grounds. This was kind of a hangout spot for us mischievous teens who ditched classes or just wanted to hang out or feel the adventurous thrill of doing the deed in a cemetery. So it wasn't uncommon to run into other people even in the dead of night. "Why won't you come back?" the voice lamented, filled with sorrow. My heart raced as I followed the sound, drawn in by the despair. I found myself in a secluded area of the cemetery, surrounded by ancient trees. There, sitting on a weathered tombstone, was a woman. She dressed modern in a sleeveless dress and seemed just as real as I am, her long hair hanging like a curtain. She was crying, her hands clasped in her lap. I had never seen her around before. It is a small, everybody knows everybody town. "Are you okay?" I asked, hesitant yet concerned. She looked up, her eyes filled with tears that seemed to glimmer in the moonlight. She was pretty cute, not going to lie. Being a male teen in my hormonal phase, I thought I'd charm my way into getting to know her. "I'm waiting for him," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He promised he'd return, but he never did." I felt an overwhelming sense of empathy for her, as if her sorrow reached deep into my soul. "Maybe he's at peace now," I suggested gently, placing a hand on her cold, exposed shoulder. She felt real. She shook her head, her cries becoming more intense. "He didn't deserve to leave me," she wailed, her voice echoing through the night. "It's more painful to dwell on that past." I felt stupid, not knowing how to respond to such words and not really knowing how to console her. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through, and I felt an unsettling chill. "Hey, it's much warmer in my car. I parked not too far." I turned, pointing toward the small side parking where I parked my car. "Also, if you need a ride." When I looked back, she had vanished, leaving only the scent of lavender and the haunting echo of her cries. I rushed out of the cemetery, feeling the weight of her grief on my heart. From that night on, I would often hear her wails in the wind, a reminder of the love she lost along with the rejection, even from a ghost chick. The Crying Mother in the Night. As a child, I often stayed with my aunt in a small house at the edge of town. One night, I awoke to the sound of soft crying coming from outside my window. At first, I thought it was just the stray neighborhood cats, as they often sound like crying babies outside, but the weeping grew louder, more desperate. I crept to the window and peered outside. Under the moonlight, I saw a woman in a long, white dress standing in the yard, her hands pressed to her chest. Her sobs echoed through the stillness of the night. I rushed to find my aunt, who was sitting in the living room, watching her shows, but her face pale. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. She nodded, her eyes filled with concern. "It's her again," she whispered. "The crying mother. They say she lost her child in a terrible accident, and she roams the streets at night, searching for him." My heart raced as I recalled the tales my aunt had shared about the woman who mourned her lost child. "What should we do?" I asked, feeling both frightened and compelled to help. Stay inside, she urged. Sometimes the sorrow can draw you in. I sat beside my aunt, huddled under her, as she turned up the TV, trying to ignore the crying woman outside. Though no matter how loud we turn up the volume, it seems like her wails still pierced through, touching our souls. I could even see the goosebumps both my aunt and I had. After that night, I often heard her cries ringing through my head, a chilling reminder of love lost and the bonds that tie us to those we have lost. The experience changed me. I learned to cherish every moment with loved ones, knowing how quickly things can change. The haunting melody. Growing up in a small coastal town, I lived in an old Victorian house that my parents inherited from my grandmother. As a child, I loved exploring every nook and cranny, but the attic always had a strange energy about it. It was filled with dusty antiques, old furniture, and forgotten memories. My grandmother had passed away when I was young, but I had vivid memories of her singing to me. One rainy afternoon, I decided to venture into the attic, hoping to uncover some old family treasures. As I rummaged through boxes, I stumbled upon a beautiful, ornate music box. It was intricately designed, with delicate flowers carved into its surface. When I opened it, the sweet melody began to play, and suddenly I was flooded with memories of my grandmother singing to me. As the music played, I felt an overwhelming sense of nostalgia, but then I noticed something unusual. The air grew colder, and I could almost feel a presence in the room. I turned around, half expecting to see someone there, but the attic was empty. However, the melody continued to play, filling the space with a haunting beauty. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that my grandmother was with me. As I lay in bed, I heard the faint sound of her singing, almost like a lullaby drifting through the hallway. I got up to investigate, following the sound down the stairs and into the living room. There, I saw the music box sitting on the coffee table, its lid closed, but the melody still played in my mind. Over the next few weeks, I experienced similar occurrences. Each night, as I fell asleep, I could hear the soft echoes of her voice, singing the songs she once sang to me. One night, I decided to speak to her. "Grandma, if you're here, please give me a sign," I whispered. The room fell silent for a moment, and then I heard a soft knock on the wall. My heart raced, but I felt comforted. It was as if she was trying to reassure me. From that day on, I left the music box on the table, and every time I passed it, I would feel a warm sensation wash over me, as if she was watching over me. Eventually, I learned more about my grandmother's life. She had loved music and often performed at local gatherings. Her spirit seemed to linger in the house, reminding me of her love and passion for life. Even after I moved away for college, I carried her memory with me, knowing she would always be a part of me. The Lady in White. During my college years, I worked part-time at a historic inn that had been renovated from an old mansion. The place was beautiful, but had a reputation for being haunted by the ghost of a woman dressed in white. Staff members claimed to have seen her wandering the halls late at night, weeping softly. One evening, I was closing up the inn after a long shift. The guests had all checked out, and the place was eerily quiet. As I moved through the dimly lit hallways, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to brush it off as exhaustion, but the sensation only intensified. As I reached the grand staircase, I heard a soft sobbing echoing through the air. It was faint but unmistakable. My heart raced as I followed the sound, which seemed to lead me to a room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, the sobbing grew louder. Inside, the room was dark, but I could make out the figure of a woman standing by the window, her back turned to me. She wore a flowing white dress, and her long hair fell down her back in waves. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. She turned slowly, revealing a pale face streaked with tears. "I'm lost," she whispered. "I can't find him." I felt a wave of compassion wash over me. "Who are you looking for?" I asked gently. "The one I loved," she replied, her voice barely audible. "He promised to return, but he never did." Her eyes bore into mine, filled with such deep sorrow that I felt tears prick my own. Just then, the room grew colder, and I instinctively took a step back. I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight, but when I looked up, she was gone. The room felt empty, but the weight of her grief lingered in the air. I left the room, shaken, and told my coworkers about the encounter the next day. One of the older staff members explained that the woman was rumored to have lost her fiancé during the war. She would often appear to those who had loved ones in conflict, mourning for them as she once mourned for her own. After that night, I often felt her presence in the inn, especially during quiet hours. I left flowers in the room where I saw her, a small gesture of remembrance for a love that endured beyond death. I hoped that in some way it brought her peace. The Crying Child. A few years ago, I moved into a charming old house in a quiet neighborhood, excited to start a new chapter of my life. The house had character, complete with creaky floorboards and antique fixtures. Shortly after settling in, I began hearing strange noises at night. Soft crying coming from what I assumed was the nursery. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the crying grew more persistent. It was a heart-wrenching sound that echoed through the hallways, pulling at my heartstrings. I decided to investigate, believing there might be a logical explanation. Perhaps a neighbor's child, or an old pipe making strange sounds. One evening, I followed the sound to the nursery. The room was dark, but as I entered, I felt a chill envelop me. The crying stopped suddenly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I flipped the light switch, revealing a nursery adorned with faded wallpaper and a dusty crib. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. As I scanned the room, I noticed a small toy on the floor, a plush bear. I picked it up, feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness wash over me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, unsure who I was apologizing to. Just then, the crying began again, louder and more desperate than before. Panicking, I rushed out of the room and decided to speak to my neighbor the next day. She was an older woman, known for her stories about the neighborhood's history. When I mentioned the crying, her expression turned somber. "Years ago, a mother lived in that house with her little girl," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "The child fell ill and passed away. The mother was devastated, and it's said her spirit still wanders the halls, mourning her loss." After hearing this, I felt a deep connection to the grieving mother. I resolved to acknowledge her sorrow. I set up a small memorial in the nursery, placing the bear on the crib and lighting a candle. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the soft cries again. but this time they felt less frantic, almost like a lullaby. From then on, I made it a routine to sit in the nursery each night, speaking softly to the mother and her lost child. I felt a profound sense of healing, as if acknowledging their grief allowed them to find some peace. The crying eventually subsided, and while I never saw their spirits, I felt their presence, a gentle reminder of love and loss. The woman in the mirror. I was visiting my cousin in a small town known for its historic charm. She lived in an old colonial house that had been in her family for generations. One afternoon, while exploring the house, I stumbled upon a large, ornate mirror tucked away in a dusty corner of the attic. It was beautiful, with intricate carvings along the edges, but it felt heavy with history. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to clean it up. As I wiped away the dust, I noticed something strange, a flicker of movement in the glass. I stepped back, but the reflection remained still. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my imagination. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the mirror and the strange feeling it gave me. I finally decided to go back to the attic, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. As I approached the mirror, I could see my reflection clearly, but there was something off about it. In the glass, I saw a woman standing behind me, her long hair flowing and her face obscured. I turned quickly, but the attic was empty. My heart raced. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. There was no answer, only the stillness of the night. I returned to the mirror, and the woman was still there, her expression one of deep sorrow. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stared at her reflection, captivated by her sadness. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I was wronged," she said softly. "They took my life before my time." I felt an overwhelming sense of compassion for her. "How can I help you?" I asked, desperate to understand. "Find my story," she urged. And just like that, she vanished, leaving only my reflection staring back at me. Determined to uncover the truth, I spent the next few days digging into the history of the house and its previous occupants. I learned about a woman who had lived there in the 1800s. She was rumored to have been wrongfully accused of witchcraft and met a tragic end. I returned to the mirror, feeling a sense of purpose. "I know your story now," I said softly. "You were innocent." I placed a small flower in front of the mirror as an offering, hoping to honor her memory. From that night on, the oppressive energy in the attic lifted, and I felt a sense of peace. I never saw the woman again, but I knew I had helped her find solace, finally allowing her spirit to rest.
I hope you enjoyed those scary stories and appreciate you staying to the end. Did you get as much of a headache watching me paint as I did painting it? I will say, I'm surprised it turned out recognizable. One thing I did learn about oil painting is you really have to smack it into place. If you enjoyed this session of art and scary stories, then like and subscribe if you dare. Would you like to see more of these videos? Don't be afraid to leave your thoughts in the comments. Until we meet again, may your dreams be filled with the whispers of the forgotten and the echoes of the unseen.